The second part in designing an AutoFlex automatic is choosing the proper route parameters. The routing tab allows us to choose what fittings PractiCAD is going to use to cover the distance from the tap we chose in the duct side section to the grill's neck. For example, here we have a rectangular neck grill all the way in the distance, far away from this piece of duct. We'd like to connect them using AutoFlex. We've already chosen under duct side that if we have a rectangular neck grill that we would like to use the 45-degree boot tap. However, that boot tap is not going to reach all the way out to the edge of the grill. So we're going to need PractiCAD to put rectangular straight duct in between the boot tap and the grill to cover that distance. So what we do is we go over to the route tab. And here we're going to have two choices, rectangular and round. What highlighting rectangular means is if we need to use rectangular duct, we should use specific rectangular duct fittings in specific scenarios. And there happens to be currently 5 different scenarios. And if we choose the round tab, we're basically saying that if round duct is needed, we should use specific round duct fittings in specific scenarios. So we're going to click on rectangular for this tutorial. Here you can see that we have 5 scenarios currently: straight, offset, turn, to round, and sizing. Straight usually means that we need to use fittings to get direct from a tap to a grill. Almost always we're using rectangular straight duct or round and spiral pipe to cover that distance. Offset means that if in fact the duct we're trying to attach to and the grill's neck are offset, so we need a transition or some fitting to break left or set right, we would choose that fitting over here on the right so that if that scenario happens, we do have the proper fitting in the proper offset. Turn we use if we need to make a turn. For example, over here on the left you can see we've got a round neck grill all the way out in the distance. If we wanted to attach it to this fitting, we'd probably have to come all the way out here and then make a 90-degree turn and go out to that grill. So what we would do is say if we're going to make a 90-degree turn, we'd then select the proper fitting we'd like to use in that scenario. To round basically means that we're going to go from rectangular duct to round duct, and therefore we'd be picking what type of square to round we'd like to use in that scenario. And sizing is classified whenever we're going to have a size change to complete the route, that we should use a specific transition and choose the proper choice over here. So we're going to go over all of these categories one at a time. The first scenario we're going to cover is the straight scenario. The straight scenario is dictated whenever we're going to run duct directly from the branch we're trying to use and the center of the grill. And therefore we're usually going to use rectangular straight duct or spiral and round pipe. What we have here are 4 choices under the straight scenario: use catalog, use default duct, use fitting straights, and use variable length duct. We're going to go over each choice one at a time. You can see here that we have an opportunity to pick out of a list of fittings in case we run into a straight run. If we have a straight run and rectangular duct is needed, we're going to choose to use the rectangular straight duct fitting. However, if you have created a catalog out of existing PractiCAD templates and would like to use a fitting out of that catalog, you can click on the empty space next to Use Catalog and you'll get a drop-down menu of every catalog you've created for that specific fitting. And then you can choose that catalog and PractiCAD will grab fittings out of that catalog for this run. However, in this tutorial, we're just going to stick with the original rectangular straight duct template. The next 3 choices are the most commonly used. The first choice, use default duct, can be set to yes or no. If you set it to yes, PractiCAD will always use full-length joints wherever possible. A full-length joint is classified by whatever length you have set in your default stock options. Your default stock length options happen to be in the library icon underneath the ductwork options, and there are separate tutorials. Generally, for spiral duct, it's 10 foot, and for rectangular duct, it's 5 foot. So if you're using 5-foot coil stock and would like to have those pieces placed in your route, you'd usually set use default duct to yes. It is very rare where this choice is set to anything but yes. For example, what we have here on the left is a rectangular grill neck and a piece of duct that we're routing to. And we've got use default duct selected as yes. And what we're going to do is press OK. And when we route, you can see that PractiCAD has chosen to use a full-length joint here, and it's also used a full-length joint here. The way PractiCAD routes is it starts with the end of the duct line. So what it does is it puts the first full-length piece at the end where the grill is. Then it goes back to the tap you've chosen and then starts routing as many full-length pieces as you need to get back to this full-length piece. If in fact a short piece is needed, you can use the option for variable length duct, which we're going to cover in a minute. So imagine in this particular case, we'd actually like to change the route a little bit. We would not like to have this 21-inch short piece here, and we'd actually like to add that length to the boot tap straight. Well, what we can do is we can use the option Use Fitting Straights. We're going to highlight both of our entities, and we're going to go back over to the AutoFlex option. And this time we're going to change the route slightly. We're going to go into the Route tab, and we're going to go right here where it says Use Fitting Straights, and we're going to say yes. When you say yes, you're giving PractiCAD permission to extend the straights of the fittings. Fittings could be elbows, boot taps, transitions, whatever fittings we're using outside of rectangular duct. The way it works is PractiCAD will always try to use default duct first, then it'll extend fitting straights, and then if you cannot cover the route with those two options, only then will it use variable length duct or small pieces if you say yes. If you say no, it will never use a variable length duct. Generally, when we're trying to use fitting straights, I usually keep all three at yes. What we're going to do now is press OK and see how PractiCAD routes this time. Here you can see that it's actually added the straights to the fitting, and then it's used the default stock length, and it's removed all the small pieces. This is the most common method used when routing out to entities. The second scenario we offer is the offset scenario. Here we choose the parameters that we would like PractiCAD to use if in fact we run into an offset situation. To demonstrate this, we have on the left a rectangular neck grill and a piece of rectangular duct highlighted, and we're going to try to run an AutoFlex route between the two. Take note that the center of the grill's neck is lined up directly with the joints between these two fittings. Since PractiCAD does not allow us to place taps directly on the joints of fittings and the tap must fit, PractiCAD is going to take whatever tap we chose for the duct side parameters, and it's going to put it as close to this connection as it can possibly fit. Even if it does that, in this scenario though, you would recognize that the out of that tap, or the center line of the out connection of that tap, would not be perfectly aligned with the center line of this grill, which means we'd run into an offset situation. If we're going to run into an offset situation, PractiCAD will let us pick what fitting we should use in that particular case. So what we're going to do here is we're first going to go over to our drop-down menu and say if we run into an offset situation, we'd like to use a finished length transition. Now we're going to come over here and go down these parameters one at a time. First, we have the ability to use a catalog item or an entity we created from a finished length transition. Here we're just going to use the original. Next, we have minimal length. Minimal length is currently set to 0, which means this particular offset can be anywhere from 0 all the way to any number to reach the actual distance we need. If in fact we don't want the fitting to be a specific size smaller than any value, we can put that value in here. So if we set a minimal length 12, this finished length transition would never be smaller than 12. Most of the time when we put a value in here, PractiCAD keeps that value when it goes to route. Now we're going to choose minimal straight in. Imagine we needed to make sure that we have to have straights on this transition to roll it through TDC. So what we're going to do is say our minimal straights must be 2 inches and 2 inches. Now we've got maximal offset to width ratio and maximal offset to depth ratio. Now there are separate tutorials that teach you exactly how these parameters work, and I highly recommend taking a look at it. Basically, if these parameters are set to 0, PractiCAD will be unable to offset any fittings. In other words, if you set these values to 0, you will never get a choice selected for offset. PractiCAD will always jump to try to route a turn instead. Quite often we keep these at 0 in this particular section. However, if offsets are going to be allowed, we need to give it the proper offset to width ratio. Here we're going to set it to 8 and 8. That's a very high value, and if you watch the tutorials on routing, it would explain that that means we should always be able to get a transition offset between two distances. Now what we're going to do is press OK. Notice when we do that, the PractiCAD has chosen the duct side tap, which is an angled boot tap. It has now taken the finished length transition fitting. It has given us the straights we asked for, minimal of 2 inches and 2 inches. It has maximized the full length joint, and it's connected a hard route. The third choice for scenarios is the turn scenario. Here we're going to pick the fitting we would use if in fact PractiCAD needs to make a turn to get out to the grill. Take a look on the left. Here we've got a rectangular neck grill we're going to attach to a piece of rectangular duct. We know that our offset to width ratio parameters are not going to be set high enough to offset a fitting all the way here. So PractiCAD is going to need to come out and make a turn. And if this situation occurs, we're going to choose what fitting we'd like PractiCAD to use. So what we're going to do is come over to our drop-down menu, and here we're going to say, let's choose a square elbow. So if a turn is needed, a square elbow fitting is going to be used. Once again, we can use a catalog square elbow if we like by picking from the drop-down menu here. We can choose the parameters for radius factor. If we're using a radius elbow, we could say that our radius factor should always be 1, and PractiCAD will modify this template to make sure the radius factor is 1. Then we can choose the minimal straight in and minimal straight out. We can say that our minimal straight in is 4 and 4 for our square elbows. Then we have the maximal offset to depth ratio, and there are separate tutorials on that particular parameter. Once we've chosen all the parameters we need for turn, if a turn is needed, PractiCAD will utilize this square elbow fitting. Here we're going to press OK. Notice that PractiCAD has started to route the angled boot tap. In this particular route, we said to use fitting straights. So you can see it's adding fitting straights to the boot tap, and then it's maximizing the straights of the square elbow as well to make sure that we get a full length piece of duct at the end. So we have here use default duct, yes. Use fitting straights, yes, and we have for a turn the square elbow selected with minimal 4-inch straights. The fourth scenario is the 2 round scenario. This is the fitting that PractiCAD should use and the parameters of that fitting if in fact we need to use a square to round or round to square. Notice on the left we have a round neck grill, and we're going to attach it to a rectangular piece of duct. Now what we're going to do here is show you what we've chosen for duct side. Under duct side, we have said that if it's a round neck grill, we would like to use a 45-degree boot tap. And we're going to hard line to it, meaning we're going to use hard duct. So if we're going to use a 45-degree boot tap as a tap, and we're going to try to use hard duct and attach to a round neck grill, at some point we're going to need a square to round fitting. You can see here that it says add to neck size 6 inches. So we know the width out of the boot tap is going to be 6 inches larger than the grill's neck. And we're going to start with the 45-degree boot tap. And then what we're going to do is say under the route tab, if we need rectangular duct, and we will need rectangular duct because we're going to route from an angled boot tap, which is a rectangular fitting. If a square to round is needed, we're going to pick the fitting we'd like to use. So in this tutorial, we're going to come in and say, let's choose the finished length squared around. Now we're going to choose all the parameters, and they're very similar to the ones in the earlier exercises. We're going to say, do we need to use a catalog squared around? Here we're going to say no. Do we want a minimal length? We're going to say the minimal length of our squared around should be 24 inches. Most of the time, if we put a value here, PractiCAD is going to make sure that the squared around is exactly 24 inches. Now we're going to say for minimal straight in and minimal straight out, we don't need them to be set at anything. And maximal offset to width and depth ratio. Here we're going to set them to 1 and 1. We're actually routing direct to the grill, so the squared around should not offset at all. But squared arounds are transitions, and they can offset. And if you would like them to be able to offset by a specific width or depth ratio, you can put in the proper values here. Once again, there are separate tutorials on exactly how to use maximal offset and depth width ratios. Now we're going to say OK. When we do that, you can see that PractiCAD has started the route with an angled boot tap. Then it's chosen a squared around at the minimal length, 24 inches. It's switched it to spiral pipe, and now it's routed hard duct all the way to the grill. So this is a good way to demonstrate how to use the 2 round scenario. If we were to do this in reverse, from round duct to a rectangular neck grill, we would use a round to square fitting, the inverse of a square to round. The last scenario to choose are the parameters for the sizing scenario. Here we choose what fitting and the parameters of that fitting the PractiCAD should use if we have to go down in size. For example, on the left-hand side, we're going to route from rectangular duct to a round neck grill, and that grill happens to be 12 inches in diameter. Now, if you look over here in the AutoFlex and take a look at the parameters we have, for duct side, if it's a round neck grill, we have stated to choose the 16-inch spin. So PractiCAD is going to use the 16-inch spin no matter what because we haven't selected a catalog. So what's going to happen is instead of using spin-ins and having PractiCAD select from it, it's going to be a 16-inch spin without question. Then on the grill side, we've chosen that for round neck grills, we should turn down and use an elbow. And we have not chosen the catalog for the elbow, and the tutorials for grill side are coming up shortly. Here we've said that we're going to use a 12-inch elbow to attach to the 12-inch grill neck. So if we're going to start this route with a 16-inch spin, and we've told it to end the route with a 12-inch elbow, somewhere we're going to have a size change. So if we've got in our routing underneath the round duct parameters, under sizing, we're going to say, let's choose to use a finished length round reducer. And we're going to say the minimal length is going to be 12 inches so that we want this reducer to be no smaller than 12. Most of the time, PractiCAD will actually use the value 12 inches. We're going to say minimal straight in and out. We don't need any minimal straight. And we're going to say our maximal offset to diameter ratio is going to be 1. And we've explained a little of that in the other scenarios here. So what we're going to do is press OK. When we do that, notice that PractiCAD does go and grab the 16-inch spin, and it has used the 12-inch medium pressure elbow, as you can see here. So to compensate for the size change, it's used the finished length reducer that we had chose. So right here we got a finished length round reducer. PractiCAD has chosen that out of the sizing parameters, and now the route is correct.